Hey everyone, today we are going to be talking about rivets, and more specifically we are going to be talking about removing rivets when you need to. I had a comment on one of the videos about the unlikely sewing tools, asking if maybe there was an unlikely sewing tool that could help with rivet removal. And what I have for you is maybe not that unlikely of a sewing tool, but hopefully this helps if you end up in a situation where you need to take out a rivet. There are a few things that I want to address from the offset. The most important being that rivet removal, while I have put this under the quick fix title, is not really quick. It's not easy, but it is doable. So you can get a rivet out if you set it incorrectly, but I suggest only doing it if you really, really need to. So let's say like in a strap situation when you've got rivets here, if they're not quite lined up where you need them to be, consider if they're still functional and whether you really do need to take them out or whether it's just something that you want to do for aesthetic reasons and what your limits are. Because there is always the potential that when you take a rivet out, you are going to damage the strap underneath. Now, there are circumstances where your rivet is not going to be functional. So I've just set some as an example here, and you can see that this rivet here is not set properly. So that's just not going to function the way that a rivet is supposed to, and that is going to need to come out. Taking a rivet out from softer fabric is going to be more difficult. Taking a rivet out from thicker fabric is going to be more difficult. Things that are more forgiving are like a cotton canvas or waterproof canvas. Quilting cotton that is thin is not, it's probably like medium difficulty. The hardest thing I find to remove rivets from are soft faux leathers or vinyls. So I'm going to demonstrate on that material today. You will find that different finishes on your vinyl will have different durability. So let's get going. First up, let's just talk about rivets real quick. We have got the socket portion and the stud portion. When you set your rivet, you're putting the stud into the socket and then it gets pressed down either in your hand press or your rivet press. So from this clicked in position to this, kind of tricky to see, this is the smushed down position, if you will, the pressed position. So that is what you're trying to pry apart, and that is why it is so difficult, because in between these two layers, you've got a whole bunch of fabric. You might have 4, 8 layers of vinyl in there that you are trying to pry this rivet off. So that is why it is tricky, and that is why it is a risk always, every time you pull out a rivet, of damaging your vinyl. So how do you do it? I like to use a pair of pliers. Now, I have been using these pliers, which is just a regular set of pliers with the ridged edge for gripping, and you can use those to pull out your rivets. Now, this is where kind of my unlikely sewing tool comes in. I have here a pair of miniature pliers. These pliers are a fair bit smaller than the standard pliers. They have the same grip, but it's much finer, and they're much skinnier. And I find that when I use the miniature pliers as opposed to the regular pliers, it is actually a fair bit easier to get the rivet off because it's easier to slide under that rivet to really pop it off. Also, with the added bonus that the smaller ridge on the side here is less likely to damage your vinyl. I experimented with many pairs of pliers to figure out which ones were the best ones. And you should see my Amazon history. There are so many on there. These ones are the best ones. I wish they weren't more expensive, but they are the best ones. They are smaller. They have the grips. A lot of smaller pliers don't have the grips. These ones are really comfortable to use. They're a really good size, and they just really do the job. When you are removing a rivet, you want to have an order of operations, if you will. The first most important thing is you want to remove the socket side. You do not want to be working from the stud side. When the stud is pressed down into your fabric, it kind of bites in to the material, and that makes it very hard to remove your rivet from the stud side. So you want to work from the socket side. Ideally, the socket side is going to be on the back, and that would look like this here. This is a socket with the cap removed, and that's going to be the easiest thing to remove, and any potential damage that comes from removing that rivet is going to be hidden on the inside of the bag. Now, if you're like me, you may not really pay attention to which way you're setting your rivets when you do so. So if I have a rivet that I need to remove, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the back of my bag. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to take this rivet out. I'm going to pop that cap off. take your pliers, give it a little squeeze. I squeeze 90 degrees on and off till I get a good doming of that cap, and then I can take it off. Pop that aside. And now I can get this rivet out. What I'll do now is take my pliers and squeeze that leftover part of the socket in to the middle, trying to make it as small as possible, as small as the hole, ideally. You're not going to be able to get it quite as small as your hole, but close enough, and you'll be able to pop it through. So squeezing that nice and tightly, being careful of the material underneath so that you don't scratch or tear it, and that the pieces of metal that you're squeezing don't scratch or tear it. Just squeeze it in, and then turn it over, and you're going to work it off from this side. So you want to pull up this rivet enough so you can get your plies underneath, and then, preferably without removing the cap, you're just going to wiggle that out, and there you have it. So you can see from the front, we have a pretty good area here where it is not damaged. You can see the indent from the rivet, but the vinyl underneath looks good. And on the back, where the socket was, it's not too bad. Now, if we had the stud on this side, it's going to be a different story. So let's try that again from the stud side, and we'll see what happens. So you decide you need to take this rivet off. It's the stud side. You don't know that yet. You're like, well, I got to work from the back. That's what Nicole told me. So pop that cap off the same way as we did for that one. And then you see that it's a stud. In a real life situation, if you pop that cap off and it's a stud on the back, you're going to flip it over and you're going to take it off from this side. You're going to do the same thing, being very careful of your vinyl or your fabric, because you are now working on the exterior, the more visible side of your bag or strap. Pop that cap off. Do the same thing, squeezing it gently, being careful of the vinyl. Make it as small as you can. And then we're going to work from the back again, and we're going to pop that rivet out. This is a little trickier because it's just the stud piece. Just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. And it's just bitten down into the fabric a bit. I've also been reusing this same scrap over and over and over again. So just pull that out. It's just bitten in a little too hard there. As I said, this is a reused piece of vinyl. Oh gosh, that looks terrible. But from the front, it doesn't look too bad. It's not perfect because you had to work from the front, and also I've used this over and over and over again, but it's not too bad. Now, let's do it again, this time trying to remove it from the stud side. So, let's pretend you need to remove this rivet. You go to the back, you pop the cap off. And then it's the stud. But you forget what I said about only working from the socket side, and you decide that you're going to try to get that off. So, the last thing you want to do is squeeze this stud piece further into the material, because then you're going to get rips and tears. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our pliers. We're just going to pull it up ever so gently. And already I can see that it's starting to cut into that a little bit with the sharp edge of that stud piece. If you have wire cutters, you could use those here too. Squeeze it in. Squeeze it in. Look, I've been using this, but a lot of this is new. This is so bad. Okay, turn it over. Take it out from the socket side, from the front. Front looks fantastic because you barely touched it and the socket is so easy to come out. But the back, it doesn't look great. So, number 1 lesson, work from the socket side. Number 2 lesson, work from the back. Number 3, stud from the front. Don't do it. Why would you need to? You can just do the socket from the back. So let's try this again. Socket from the front. Squeeze. Take that out. You know it's the socket because it looks like that. Now, just for comparison, I'll show you the stud on this one. So you can see them next to each other. And you see how different they look. Just gently coax that up. There we go. So if you see, the stud and the socket look quite different. You can see that little smushed end bit, that's the tip of this, flattened down from my rivet press. That's the side you want to work from. If you see this, you got to flip it over and work from that side. It's just going to come out so much more easily with so much less damage to your vinyl. So you want to see that. If you see this, try the other side. We're going to take the rest of this one out. That little remnant of the socket points away from the fabric, whereas this part of the stud bites down into the material, which is great when you've got weight on that rivet. That's what helps it keep your bag together, keep your straps together. But when you're trying to remove it, that is what's going to cause you some grief. So just squeeze that in, and then we're just going to take it from this side, lift it a little, and wiggle that out. Now, obviously, it's easier to wiggle on this tiny little scrap of fabric than it would be on a strap or on your bag. So the small pliers are much easier and more gentle to work with than the big chunky pliers. Work from the socket side and preferably work from the back. And then you'll be able to get your rivets out without too much, I cannot guarantee none, but without too much damage to your fabric underneath. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.